and we'll let you go, Jim.
All right. Good evening. How you guys doing? I am Jim, W6LG. I've been licensed for almost 60 years and have been really active over that time, both VHF, UHF, emergency communications, but most of my interest is in working DX. So I've done things like built antennas. This is a newer location for me, a newer QTH. At the old location, we were there for 40 years. It was a mountaintop with about it was 6.5 acres. And there I had phased Aggies on 20 meters that were side by side. So they were 20 meters apart. They were about 15 meters tall, and I phased them using a box that I built. Here, I can barely get an antenna on the property. In fact, if you guys have any interest in seeing my, I'll show you my tower, which I moved from the mountaintop. I get my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. I moved it from the mountaintop to here. The other towers I sold for not much money. And instead of having a 4-element Yagi, I've got a 3-element homemade. Let me do this, and I'll bring up some video that I shot of, oh, come on, today of the antenna. Now I have a tower that's motorized, so it not only rotates, but it changes its height also. So maximum height is about 36 feet, and minimum height's about 25 feet. I do that because the neighbors aren't happy with the antenna, and I tend to keep it down until I need it. So let me see if I can bring this up, take you guys off the screen. And this is a video I shot earlier today. Okay, got it. And what I'll do is I'll start it playing, and then I'll speed it up. So it's a 3-element Yagi, 3 elements, get up there, 3 elements on an 18-foot boom. And in here, I have a remote control on 433 megahertz. I can run the tower up and down. I have speed controls, pulse width modulation. And so I can rotate it and change its vertical height at the same time. Right now, it's at about 25 feet or so. So one of the things that George and I have been working on is a counter that will count impulses from a disc I put on the winch, and the counts will tell me how high it is. So I can run it up to a certain height and stop. And as you can see, even though I sped it up, I have it turning fairly slow. So it's 3 elements. It's 18-foot boom. From the driven element to the director is about 12 feet. From that driven element in the middle to the reflector is about 6 feet. And let's see if I can speed this up just a bit more. Anyway, that's the antenna that I'm using. Also, let me get me back up on the screen. I'm running a homemade amplifier. Does anybody here not know what a linear amplifier is? I'm assuming that everybody does. So the amplifier that I built has one of these tubes in. This weighs about 12 pounds, I think. What's interesting about this tube is that, hang on a sec, I got to stop that video. What's interesting about this tube is that it coasts at 1500 watts output, and the top of it, let me get this other camera on. The top of it comes off, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, there's a green screen. I'll put it up. And here's the tube. The tube has a not exactly unique, but you don't see many of them. The top comes off the tube, and it bolts into place. The socket, yeah, you can buy a socket for $250, or in my case, I made a socket. It is a grounded grid amplifier. The grid of the tube is this ring where my thumb is located. So this sits literally on the chassis, and that's how you ground the grid of the tube. Another really popular, and that's not a popular tube, another really popular tube is this one. This is a 3500Z from iMac. You can tell it's from iMac because of the shape of the plate. The tube is good, it has 500 watts of plate dissipation. Each one of these tubes capable of 800 or 900 watts output. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and interrupt me, because I don't want to keep on talking. If you have a question about something, it's not a problem. So for 60 years, I've gotten up in the morning and literally planned my day around the gray line. The gray line, I don't know if I can show you that right now. The gray line is the twilight zone. It's the difference between night and day, light and dark. So in that path, like sometimes that path is open to India or Europe. I want to, like a surfer would surf in a curl of a wave, I try to put my signal into that gray line, and it circles around the globe. Could come up in South Africa, could come up in India, could come up in England. Depends on the time of the year and the position of the sun. So I sort of know when conditions are going to be good to a certain area. Like right now, there's probably a path to South Africa. My station is behind me. It consists of 3 linear amplifiers and 3 transceivers, an Elecraft, an ICOM, and a ASU, all pretty much new. Let me get this off the screen. Did anybody have any questions about what I've talked about so far?
You can unmute and talk to Jim if you'd like.
Anyone with a question of any kind? My main interest, I've won a number of awards. I've got plaques on the wall for volunteering there. And then I've got 3 of these. I'll hold a couple up. These are awards for being what they call an Elmer or a mentor. The newest one says mentor, but for teaching people about amateur radio and electronics and emergency communications. And that's what I did for years. Besides being a DXer, I ran an emergency group in Nevada County. We now live in Placer County, but did that for probably 10 years or so. George, I'm going to put you back up on the screen, and since I'll see if anybody else has a question or if there's any questions at all.
Okay, anybody, go ahead and feel free to unmute and ask Jim any questions that you want. I first started watching Jim. I rebuilt a linear amplifier GON set, and the manuals that I got on the GON set for tuning up this thing was like, I've been in electronics a long time. It was just like gobbledygook. It's like, watch the grid dip and watch the plate and do this, and I realized that was written in a day when there was no high power power meters. So that's the way that you used to tune these things. And now I've got a 1,000-watt Bird power meter. So I was looking for an easy way to tune a linear amplifier, and I came across Jim, and he had several videos about how to tune a linear, and I watched it and I went, well, that's easy. Once I had it figured out, it was not a problem at all to go through and do through the entire calibrations. Ray, you can talk if you want, Ray. Ray typed, Jim, what is the polarization of your antenna?
Okay. It is the strict answer, the honest answer is it's horizontally polarized. You can tell because the elements are horizontal. But once the wave hits the ionosphere, it comes back down to Earth and bounces again. For example, if it were going to India, it may have to hit the ionosphere 7 or 8 times, each time losing signal strength. Each time it hits the ionosphere, its polarization gets scrambled. So to answer your question, it starts off as horizontal, but it gets mixed up on its way to wherever on the planet I'm trying to talk to. Does that answer your question? The answer is it depends. Okay. You still there, George?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else with a question of any kind?
So somebody else asked, hi, Jim, were you an electrical engineer major in college? Your career seems very interesting.
No. And even at graduate school, I was taking my degrees. I've associate in science and a bachelor of science, and they're both in finance. And I've never taken an engineering class. I've taught it, but I've never taken a class. And it probably shows because occasionally I make mistakes.
Well, I think we all make mistakes, so that's just part of being human. It's very good. You're very cool. You self-studied.
I did, and I can't bring Zoom back up on the screen for some reason. I did, and I think most of us who get an amateur radio license, and there is something I do need to cover now that I think about it. But those of us who get an amateur radio license, even if you're an engineer, most engineers, no offense to an engineering student or a graduate engineer, don't know anything about RF, or they know damn little. They may say they know a lot, but they don't. And so you learn about it as you do it. So I learned about linear amplifiers working. That one's mostly homebrew. The other one's been modified a great deal with a larger plate transformer and some other stuff on the inside. So you learn by doing, by building an antenna like a 3-element Yagi or a dipole, which is a good antenna. Doing those kinds of things is a great teaching moment.
Okay, Ray Vasquez, he says, Jim, have you ever thought about or studied the area near an antenna? In other words, the reactive near field.
I have. Takeoff angle on my antennas, because they're relatively low now, there's a 30-foot height limit. It's about 25 to 30 degrees. So the RF isn't hitting me or my next door neighbor. It's going out into space and hitting the ionosphere. I watched the guy's video yesterday, and he's got 150,000 subscribers. And he kept talking about the atmosphere. Well, I guess it is the atmosphere, but more specifically, it's the ionosphere. Could be F3, for example, for sporadic E. So the takeoff angle is above my neighbor's houses, so I don't worry about it. The lower the antenna is, the higher the takeoff angle. So with my antennas being relatively low, the takeoff angle is relatively high. Does that help?
Does that, Ray? Ray, does that help? I don't see a response.
Ray, you're
Okay.
not audible.
He said yes.
Okay.
Okay.
He said it's.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else got any questions? Just feel free to ask Jim whatever.
Oh, I know what I was going to talk about. Who here knows the definition of amateur radio? Since I can't see anybody, George, and I'm trying to bring it up on the screen, I'm not having any luck. Is anybody raising their hand like, yeah, I know what it is?
No.
Yeah, it's interesting because the FCC definition of amateur radio, if you talk to guys, they'll say it's a great hobby. It's an amazing hobby. I love the hobby. The FCC doesn't regard amateur radio as a hobby. The federal government does not license hobbies, do they? They might license a pilot, they might license a doctor, they might license a biolab, they might license a lot of different things. But hobbies, no. And why is that? Does anybody know why they wouldn't do that? The answer is it's not their job. It's their job, though, to license businesses and license those who engage in certain endeavors. In our case, amateur radio. And let me see if I can I don't know if I can do this or not. I'll search for it real quick. Amateur radio, according to the FCC, is not a hobby. It has a hobby aspect. There are lots of neat things you can do, and it's great fun. You can fly airplanes. You can do all kinds of different things. Talk to guys in other countries. Do volunteer work in your neighborhood. But amateur radio is a service. And let me see if I can bring this up. It's a service in that we provide a service to the members of our community. Could be the federal government, could be the local government. That may be communications in the event of a disaster, which I've done several times now. I've been involved in rescuing people. That's what some of those awards are for. Running an emergency group that during one of our fires, we lost 300 some odd houses. I think it was 330. I have searched for people and found them, and in some cases, I've found them inadvertently. Which reminds me, I'll see if I can find this definition here real quick. The FCC warns us that, let's see here. This is exactly what happened. I rolled up on an accident. Lady's laying in the street. I'm in a county vehicle. I was a building inspector, so I blocked the off ramp of the freeway, and I get out and I run up to her, and she's badly injured. She was knocked out of the vehicle, no airbags, whatever. I had two choices. I could either use my 2-meter handheld because I was standing right next to her, or I could use my county radio. The FCC would have had the right to pull my license how to use the ham radio. Why? Because there was another means to communicate. We use something other than ham radio when there are other alternatives, like a cell phone. So I've done that a couple of times where I did use the ham radio, but it was when I was working as a building inspector and I was in a way the hell out in some rural area. So they caution us not to use it in emergencies if there is another means available to us. Does anybody have any questions about that? Because it's not likely that you're going to lose your license over it, but it would just be your luck to do something like that. And the FCC is listening that day on that frequency, which is happening a little more frequently with greater frequency than it used to be. They're actually citing people for transgressions, making mistakes. Anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, let's see. So Ray Vasquez says the rules and regulations in this part are designed to provide an amateur radio service having a fundamental purpose as expressed in the following principles. A, recognition and enhancement of the value of the amateur service to the
Notice,
public.
notice, George, you said ARS, amateur radio service. Not
Right.
hobby, but service. Yeah.
Right. So the A part is recognition and enhancement of the value of the amateur service to the public as a voluntary, non-commercial communication service, particularly with respect to providing emergency communications. B, continuation and extension of the amateur's proven ability to contribute the advancement of the radio art.
Right.
C, encouragement and improvement of the amateur service through rules which provide for advancing skills in both the communication and technical phrases of the art. And D, expansion of the existing reservoir within the amateur radio service of trained operators, technicians, and electronic experts. And E, continuation and extension of the amateur's unique ability to enhance international goodwill. So John Bales says, I am just curious, what are the general ethic rules for ham radio?
I'll tell you what my rules are. Discussions about sex or sexuality or sexual orientation or those kinds of things, I don't want to engage in. It happens, unfortunately, a little too frequently. So also religion. For example, I've had 16 transfusions in about a 3-month period. Some religious groups think that transfusions are a mistake. I wouldn't discuss that on the air. I wouldn't get into a discussion with a Jehovah's Witness about transfusions. I just think it's inappropriate. So sexual orientation, politics, let's say, I'll tell you right now, I don't like Trump. Okay. You're not going to change my mind. If you love Trump, I'm not going to be able to change your mind about him. So there's no point in engaging in a conversation. You never know who's listening. So I want to keep it as civil as I can. We can argue about whether or not this is a good tube, or how to build a linear amplifier, or what makes a good receiver, or I've got an ICOM 7610 and the ASU FTDX 101, which is better. We can argue about that, but I'm not going to argue about your religion, your religious beliefs, so ethically, those things are not restricted, but you never know who's listening. And here's one of my fears, and something I did intend to bring up. There are companies now that want our HF bands, and you may not have an interest in HF, but if we lose them, we're really screwed, because it allows us to communicate around the world. Some years are better than others, depending on the sunspot cycle. If I wanted 20 meters, for example, how would I do that? I think it would be easy. I would go in front of the commissioners at the FCC with recordings. I would record as much as I could, and I would play those recordings. Oh, the FCC commissioners are a bunch of idiots. They're jerks. That they're this, they're that. How do you think they would vote when it came time to decide whether or not we should keep that band 20 meters? We're likely to lose it. So those are things I don't like to talk about. Things that if played in front of the FCC commissioners, there's 5 of them. There's been a change. 2 are now Trump appointees, and 3 are now Biden appointees. But you don't know by who's appointed them what their positions likely are. But it doesn't make any sense to have somebody go in front of the commissioners and play a recording from 80 meters where really foul stuff goes on, and then say to the commissioners, we want 80 meters and we'll eliminate this crap. Make any sense?
Yeah, it does to me. It's John Bale says yes. Stiff, I can't, Nabhan, how you pronounce his name? Stithuda? Stithuti?
Stitity.
Stithuti. Okay. He asks, if you have intermittent phone service, then should you use amateur radio during emergency?
Yes. Yeah, I would. Just be careful, because when there is an emergency, and that happened in our group, I had 60 members that we responded to fires, and there were plenty of those in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Believe it or not, the FCC was listening. They don't have many trucks, they don't have many people in the field, but when there's a disaster, they are there. They're there for a number of reasons. So we got in trouble because some people were doing things on 2 meters they should have done with a cell phone. So, but if it's an emergency, do what you need to do to save that person's life, or to limit the amount of damage being done to that person. I would rather lose my license than see a child die because I didn't take action.
Okay. Trevor Hunter asks, could you talk a bit more about your experience operating during an emergency? What were some of your biggest takeaways from experience?
As a person in charge of the group until the state took over, you you have to know the players. So let's say you've got 50 people. 10 may be really good at communicating. Forget QSL, QRs. How many people here say QSL? Don't raise your hand. I never say QSL. Never, ever, never. So my main instruction is plain language. The fires at the corner of First and Main, the fires at the corner of Second and Main, not the QTH of the fire. Why is that? Why do we want to use plain language? It's simple. The person standing next to me that's listening as I hold up my 2-meter transceiver or whatever it is, maybe a fire captain. He doesn't know QTH from QSY. So plain language, plain language, plain language, plain language. Just say it. Some of the things that have happened that were interesting is a buddy of mine, another building inspector who was a ham. He arrives on scene. The fire has crossed a major highway. And I was in the command center, and nobody thought the fire had gone across the highway. The wide highway. Well, it had. And my friend Bob was standing there, and he kept telling them it had crossed the highway, and they kept saying no, it hadn't. And finally, he went to expletives and said, "The hell it hasn't! I'm looking at the damn fire; it's gone across the road." So stick with plain language. Don't use the Q signs. Don't say Roger that. Say, okay, I understand. Just stick with what you would say if you were sitting in a restaurant talking to somebody. Communicate in simple words. Enunciate. Slow your speech down. Slow your speech down. Speak slow. The fire has crossed the road. Not fire's crossed the road. Because the people who are listening to you need to get it right the first time. If you're on medications where you can't slow your speech down, then you need to be assigned to someplace where it doesn't matter. And that's the other thing too, is I would assign, and then when somebody took my place, they would assign the best and the brightest amongst the group to the key positions. Everybody else was at schools, at parks, or whatever. We lost 320 houses. The fire burned for 5 days. Started in the community, burned all the way down to the west, turned around, burned all the way back. Got the houses that missed going one direction, got them the second time. And you may not know where Nevada City is. We thought the fire was going to take out Nevada City. Fortunately, it rained on like the 10th day of the fire. So some of the bizarre things that have happened were people saying things that didn't make any sense, speaking in Q signs, or being on a repeater and saying, well, you're 5x9. Shut up. I don't want to hear that. Did you understand what I said? Yes. Enough. I don't need a signal report. Then you shouldn't give one. Just stick to plain language. Don't say QSL. Say, yeah, I got that. You can say Roger because a lot of people know what that means if you must. But it's just about as easy to say, yes, I understand. And slow your speech down. Understand the person that you're talking to may be upset or on the phone or something. So keep your speech slow. George, I hope I covered enough topics there.
Yeah, there's just one more here. I know you're not feeling well. I'll let you go. Are people's lives saved by amateur radio in urban settings like Phoenix, Tempe, Arizona? If so, how? So,
yeah, absolutely. There was a fire near me. We had to evacuate. It was that close. So we're up on Wolf Mountain. Down the hill from us, there's a little bit of a valley, and the fire had gotten to that valley, but the fire department wasn't aware because it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that the fire had encroached on this area of old retired folks, and amateur radio put out the call. We need volunteers and we need people right now. We're losing houses. Houses are burning. People are going to die. And as usual, firemen responded when there's a fire, and so did the cops, the sheriff's department, police department, surrounding communities, cities that were 20 miles away. Cops from there drove 100 miles an hour to go rescue people. And in some cases, I'm in a wheelchair part of the time. They would put that wheelchair-bound person on their back and carry them out. So they would not have been saved. Was a dead-end street, should never have been designed that way. That's true of the street that I lived on. Yeah, they were rescued. So yes, I've seen people be saved by the actions of amateur radio operators several times. It pays big dividends. I would encourage anybody who has even the slightest interest to go ahead and get a license. And to go for the highest category of license, just go ahead and take the exams. That way, no matter what happens, you're okay on any frequency that ham radio operators can use. And also, you will learn things along the way by getting a highest class license. So anyway, that's my answer. Yes, people have been saved. Lives have been saved. I know. Here's another example. In Paradise, California, Paradise. Yes, it was called Paradise. I've got a video where fire is on both sides of the road, just cresting over the tops of these vehicles. And people are getting out because they were alerted by ham radio. And my friends are going down the road and the fire is burning like crazy. Now, the guy who went down the road, he had 2 people with him in the vehicle. I won't get into details other than to say both of those people weren't capable of understanding what was going on. And so my friend is trying to get them out, and the fire's just all over the place. They knew to evacuate because of amateur radio. So the answer is yeah, it makes a difference. Anybody else have a question about anything at all? Amplifiers, antennas, transceivers, transmitters?
Yeah, doesn't appear to be, and nobody's typing and nobody's unmuting.
Okay.
So, thank you, Jim, very much.
You're welcome
for coming, and we appreciate that. So, definitely, we're I mean, we have about 110 people on our roster. There's about 15 people in here, but I think they took away a lot during this meeting.
Okay. Well, if anybody has any questions, send an email. We can always chat that way.
Yeah, Jim's it's very simple. You just use this call sign. It's W6LG at ARRL dot, is it org or com?
Go to QRZ.com, look up my email address there and use that one.
Yeah. Well, people here who don't have a license, I'll post
Oh,
it
okay.
somewhere. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So that's why I said I think it's ARRL.org. So
Okay.
Jim, you're welcome to stick around. If not, I know you're not in the
Yeah,
best of health.
Just so you guys know, I'm undergoing chemotherapy. I've been off of it for several weeks, but my stats are starting to drop. So I'm not running a fever. If I run a fever, I've got to be rushed to the hospital, code 3. But so far, no fever. But I feel like crap.
So
All right.
everybody's saying thank you. So
No, you're welcome. Yeah, we can do it again sometime too. If you want to have me back, just let me know.
Great. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jim. Okay. Am I audible? Josh, can you hear me? Stita, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I was muted.
Cool.
You're on.
Copy. So, hello everyone. We'll go over a few things today that George and I were discussing earlier, and just another progress update of the meeting itself, and not the meeting, but club and the recent proceedings. So, can everybody see my presentation, my screen rather?
Nabhan, I'll be back in a few minutes. I got to take care of my dogs real quick.
Copy that, Josh. Is my presentation visible to everyone? Sita, can you see my
Yeah.
screen?
Right. Yeah, it is.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone. Good evening. If you can, then please feel free to turn on your webcams. If not, that's fine too. But essentially, we'll go over a few things and largely a progress update of where the club is and the next vision, right? Essentially, the vision towards having a dream Radio Shack. Now, this has been in the works for quite long time. I'd say about 2 years now. It started about the time when COVID ended, partially mid-COVID. So we'll go through these slides, and then you should have I've structured the presentation in a way where it'll mostly go through as time passed since COVID, and then it'll suddenly go all haywire with everything happening. But rest assured, I will take you through where we currently stand, and essentially the gist of this presentation is to see the past of the club, where we were, the present of the club, where we currently are, and some things that are currently ongoing, and to develop a future vision for the club. Now, this may not be a solidified vision, but to develop a vision that's strong enough that we can start working towards it. Now, this is a slide that's pulled off of my introductory presentation that we have every semester. But essentially, we were W7ASU. Before W7ASU, we were Whiskey 7 Tango Juliet Victor. In 1997, we got our vanity call sign W7ASU. Now, the antenna had a great fall. Here refers to our antenna that was the guy wires were cut by the roofers on Psychology North, and the antenna essentially fell down through the building, and we were kicked out of the Tempe main campus. In 2008, we got our current Radio Shack at Community Services Building, the CSB, and the then faculty advisor of the club, Dr. Jewett, donated some equipment to the club. And that's how we started our current Radio Shack at the Community Services Building. Now, since 2008, the clubs had its fair share of active bouts and I guess silent times. And I think 2015 and before, close to 2012, was when we were active before the club went into essentially a long dormancy because most of our equipment started to get out of phase. We didn't have up to date equipment. Our equipment was getting outdated. I think the biggest problem was with the linear. Our linear started giving up on us, and it was about a 40-year-old linear that was donated to us by an individual who passed away. Now, during COVID, the club essentially came to a standstill. On our roster, we had about 235 plus members, but none of them were active members. Most of them had retired and or were actually alumni of ASU who had retired. That's how old our roster was. But we made it a point at the time to bring on all active members, and I think that's when Stito had joined, George had joined, and essentially that's the time when a lot of our old members had joined the club. Now, in 2019, I call it the COVID revamp, and essentially what happened was in 2019, the then president of the club, Michael wanted to switch our radio over from this Kenwood that we had at the shack because it was very difficult to operate. Michael was graduating that semester and was going on to his job at Boeing, and Michael wanted to change something in the shack to ensure that there was something there commemorative of his term, essentially, of when he served as president of the club. And Michael at the time brought in this ICOM IC7300. We had some funds that were raised from selling old vacuum tubes, and we essentially got our current radio, the ICOM IC7300. And this is the radio that we still have in the shack. Now, to give you a perspective of how old our previous radio was, I actually took this picture from radiomuseums.org. That's how old our previous radio was, that it had to be put on a museum's website. Now, long story short, about the end of 2020, early 2021, we had the ICOM. Now, once we had the ICOM, we said, okay, we have the ICOM, let's get to operating. We were not operating in full functionality for a long time, and when we went into operate, we found out that we had multiple issues. Our rotor had given out. We had issues with our feed line. We had line losses with very high SWRs through the roof. And Bill can actually, Bill will be able to resonate with what I'm mentioning because Bill was one of the individuals who had come in initially to help us with this particular project when we had our antenna non-functioning. Bill, can you hear me? Are you here?
I can. Yep, I'm here.
Yep. So Bill, again, thank you so much, Bill. And Bill was a great help to at least initially we had to diagnose the whole problem and to come to a certainty that yes, this is our actual issue that we were dealing with. And if not for Bill bringing his cherry picker in the middle of COVID, and I remember the cherry picker basket was tied with metal wires. And he was actually going to get it fixed, but he did bring it out still so that we could gain some heads up time in terms of getting our issues fixed. Now, we found out that our coax at the top into the feed beam here in the center, it had rusted off and fallen. Now, the antenna is surprisingly old, and the only reason it's standing is because of Arizona's dry weather. Now, long story short, we were making plans of replacing the coaxial cable. We didn't have a lot of money in the account at the time, so we had another cable lying around in the shack, which seemed to be of a pretty good shape. It was an RG50, RG58, RG50, one of those cables. And it was already pre-spliced, and it seemed like a cable that was either purchased in tandem with the cable that was previously present and or purchased at a later date, but it was definitely a used cable. Now, that was the best option available to us at the time. So we decided to replace the cable. Now, when we were about to go to replace the cable, our rotor actually gave in and the antenna was stuck in a position where we couldn't lower it because this antenna, when it's fully extended, goes beyond this roof line. And when it's turned in a way where the beam is pointing away from the building, or rather southeast of the building, half of the antenna will actually be on top of the roof. So you can't lower the antenna. And to be able to get this through and to fix this, there was a lot of circus that had happened. That was, and that was before, no, that was after Bill had already come out. I remember Bill had gotten sick of COVID at the time, and it was during that time. And essentially, what we did was one fine weekend, Dr. Lindsay and I had gone to the shack to try and turn the antenna back into position. We tried wiggling the wire to see if it was a loose connection, something that could potentially fix itself, but the wire had probably broken off. We later got to know that it was just that the wire was too old and it had rusted and broken off at the point where it was spliced. But long story short, I climbed the tower that weekend. We took Dr. Lindsay's cave, I think it's called cave trekking, cave exploration harness. And I climbed this tower at full extended length and loosened 3 bolts, but couldn't reach one other bolt that was probably located somewhere here, right next to Stitho's face here in this picture, somewhere around there. So we had that issue, and then after some time we decided that it wouldn't be feasible for me to be standing there for long because it was the peak of summer. So instead I climbed down, and the next week we got a cherry picker from Home Depot and we loosened those bolts. Now all of these pictures here, except this one, are roughly a week or 2 later when we had an antenna fix expedition essentially, and Stitho, and I think Stitho was there, a few other club members, along with uh, Michael, the previous president, and Duck Lindsay. So we essentially brought the antenna tower down. We switched our previous rotor with a ASU G450. And at this time was also when we installed antenna rotor digitizer, because from COVID, we had learned one thing, which was we need to be able to digitize our shack to ensure that such an issue, if does occur in the future, we are prepared for that. And as a hobby, ham radio is a very evolving hobby, so we don't get stranded. And that's this picture essentially here. The EA4TX was a digitizer unit that digitizes this particular G450 rotor to interface it with Ham Radio Deluxe so that you can do online operations. Now, when we got this down, there were a few other things that we did, and we had essentially supplemented these guy wires with an extra paracard line, just because most of these guy wires were fairly old and we didn't want them breaking. But apart from that, we had swapped the coax and a few other things like I previously mentioned. Now, that was essentially all the refurbishment that was done up till the point in February when we had our first ARRL school club roundup, for which we won the 5th place in the United States in the college in the collegiate category. But after that, there was not really much in terms of let's say upgrades or fixes that we did to the shack. Now, after the February ARRL School Club Roundup, we were fairly certain that most of our equipment, if not all, was up to functionality, with the exception of our linear. Now, this linear is about 45 plus years old. It has 3 INAC tubes in it, each of which are capable of putting out about 400 watts with a peak wattage of 2.5 kilowatts plus. It can go beyond the legal limit to account for any feed line losses, but you would obviously calibrate that to ensure that you're operating within the legal limit. Now, after we had switched over the radio, we were left with an ICOM i7 300 radio, an Alpha 347 linear capable of putting out full legal limit of power. Our antenna was the same antenna that the club had since it moved to the community services building. It's a Moosley TA33HF antenna. It's a 3-element beam with 40 meters ability added on as well. This was a factory add-on that was performed to the beam. However, recent SWR checks with a nano VNA, we found that we have terrible SWR, 9.3 something on 40 meters. So 40 meters is currently unusable. 10, 15, and 20, we are fairly within spec with slight deviation, but that doesn't stop us from operating. Now, apart from that, during this time, like I said, this was just after COVID and everything was on Zoom, at least with ASU and a lot of our classes. And this was the time when we brought out the old Dusty Ham Radio Deluxe lifetime membership that was given to the club. And we interfaced that particular unit with the ICOM. The ICOM was actually capable of being interfaced to the Ham Radio Deluxe software, while our previous radio wasn't. And with that interface ability, we were able to interface the ICOM, and then the rotor controller that I'm pointing here had its own software that we could use. Now, this was a very finicky setup to use, not reliable at all to say the least. The reason being, we were using Ham Radio Deluxe to control the radio. We were using Google Voice to actually transmit our voice to the shack and back. And then we were using TeamViewer to actually control the computer. So it was 3 different softwares, hopefully interfacing with each other at the time of operation and everything going well. There was a lot of audio lag and we couldn't perform contacts well with this particular setup. So I guess this was the point when we decided that we need to improve our remote abilities. One, because that was our most recent point of evolution after COVID, and we wanted to fix remote abilities, but also fix our antenna, which had questionable SWRs at 40 meters. And in general, the antenna needed an overall calibration because it was fairly old. Now, this became even more certain during the current school club roundup, which happened mid-October when we were mid-October, November. I don't remember the date, but we were not able to operate during this particular school club roundup, and it was largely in part due to our linear giving in. Our Alpha 347, I think we pronounced it dead this school club roundup because it was barely putting out less than 300 watts when in full operational capability, it should be able to go up to full legal limit. But also we knew that one of its tubes, or rather a combination of all 3 tubes or 2 tubes, had weakened and one tube had given out because it was putting out about 600 to 900 watts prior to the school club roundup. Now, this with that event occurring, we were certain that we wanted to switch over our entire radio shack and upgrade the equipment. Now, the problem was there was very little funding at the time to go and purchase new radios, essentially. But all during this time, with the initial thought of improving remote abilities, I was on a quest to bring us potentially more funding in the form of money. And George was also working on ARRL funding requests, as well as I was looking at in ASU funding requests that we could bring in. And a little before the current school club roundup that occurred during October, that the most recent school club roundup, we became an FSO officially. So it was a long fight trying to become an FSO because they had certain regulations that they wanted to meet, including having a Fulton faculty as the primary advisor, which wasn't really a possibility in our case because Dr. Lindsay's been the faculty advisor for the club for a long, long time now. And after meeting with the Dean of Students of the Fulton Schools of Engineering, we finally were able to come to an agreement with that particular segment. And that was also the time when we had Dr. Aberley join us as our Fulton liaison, and we became an FSO. Now, apart from just becoming an FSO and getting the FSO required funding, one fine evening, I went over to the dean's office and pitched the idea of reviving the club, and we were awarded with $25,000 in funding for this particular renovation of the shack, so to say, along with the $600 that USG gives as a part of its operational funding. Now, with that money that came in over the past, these purchases have been made over the past 6 months, most of them in the last few weeks. We finally purchased a Flex Radio 6400 along with a Maestro control console. The Flex Radio itself is delivered. The Maestro console is yet to be delivered. They're on a back order to shipping the actual console, but that should come in soon. Now, apart from the Flex Radio itself, we also changed our linear. We now have ACOM 1500 linear with 6 meters ability. And it's essentially the other very crucial thing that happened here was going from a 120 volt system that the Alpha 347 used. It was rather actually engineered into the Alpha 347 system. The Alpha 374, I keep saying 347, but the 374 was designed for 240 volts, but they had switched it over to 120 volts at the time when it was commissioned in the shack. So we still need to make this switch, but we need to switch from the 374 to this ACOM. This as well is delivered and is sitting in the shack. The 220 volt essentially now comes from a power outlet across the hallway, and we have a thick dryer extension cord that supplies this, that is capable of carrying well beyond the current that this requires at peak drive. Now, these are essentially the two major big updates in terms of equipment that happened to the shack in the last 6 months, so to say. And it was largely due to the part that our previous equipment, one, our linear was getting old, and we knew that the vacuum tubes were giving in and we had to switch it out soon. And also, with the addition of flex radio, this initial thought that we spoke about with regard to making our remote abilities more evolved happens, because now we don't need to use Google Voice and Ham Radio Deluxe and all of these softwares, because the Flex Radio comes with its own proprietary software that we can use to remote into the shack from anywhere in the world. Now, I guess once these were done, the next question was, are we at full operational ability? Now, one of Doug Lindsay's and the club's vision to begin with, and this was a vision of Mike as well, the previous president, when he left through, was that we have full operational abilities. Now, one of the goals towards attaining that larger vision was to include 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and 6 meters into our operational ability. So 6, 2, and 70 centimeters. Our current antenna had capabilities of 10 all the way through to 40 meters, excluding the 30 meters, which again, it's not really active on. So 40, 20, 17, 12, 10, 6 meters was something we wanted to add, 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Now, during this purchase spree of essentially getting these two radios, I also included into our purchase request to get 6 meter, 6 element. It was a 6 meter, 6 element directional beam that we got in a Yagi antenna for that, as well as an egg beater antenna for 70 centimeters and 2 meters. Both of these antennas are delivered as well. And one other club member of the shack, one other club member who couldn't attend today, he's actually at the shack right now. He is working on the 2 meter antenna, and over the past few weeks, Ritvik and I have been building this and trying to tune this up to spec to bring it to a 1-to-1 SWR. Now, apart from these two new antennas being added, we had some more miscellaneous add-ons, so to say. Our lightning protection system, we didn't really have a date of when it was last validated and when our tubes were changed. So I had discussed this with George initially, and George had recommended, and me and George had gone over a lot of things with regard to improving our antenna protection system. So we got a new new discharge tubes to put into our current lightning arrestor systems, as well as new lightning arrestor systems altogether, along with the pick at the top of the antenna to switch over, so that we can now have a functional lightning arrest system that we can put in place. Now, apart from just the lightning arrest system, we also, this purchase still hasn't been made, but the goal is to make this in the next few weeks once we have a good quotation, which is to switch out our current coax cable to a more low latency cable, such as the LMR 400. This is the current cable that we are targeting, with some cheaper alternatives to the LMR with same efficiency. Now, apart from these two, in terms of attaining the dream shack configuration, the other thing was to bring in a label maker to be interfaced with our logging software to print out addresses and QSL reports to stick onto QSL cards and send them out. Though QSL cards are now digitized, I think one of the things within this club is to try to keep the traditions of ham radio alive. And one of those goals is to have QSL cards that the club has that can be sent out. We have two individuals within our club who are working on designing new QSL cards, but essentially this as well is delivered and is sitting in the shack. Now, apart from all of these that we spoke about, I think one of these pictures shows it, but we have a very old computer with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I don't really think that will be capable of running the new Flex radio that we got in. So the next goal is to actually purchase a refurbished computer because we don't need a new computer. A refurbished would do just fine. And the goal is to get something around 16 to 32 GB of RAM that can handle the Flex radio being interfaced, but also have a decent graphics processor within it to be able to display the waterfall chart as well as interface some other charts within the two new monitors that we have purchased. One of them is a high refresh rate and another one of them is a standard 75 hertz refresh rate that we got in. One of them is delivered, the other monitor is yet to be purchased. Now, this is largely all of the additions and upgrades that have happened to the shack area itself. I had spoken about this. I mean, I didn't mention it, but one of the things I had spoken about initially during the beginning of this year was this maker space that we have. It's an adjacent room that's connected to the main shack, and the goal was to have a fully functional maker space where we had abilities to brew functional antennas, to work on linears, and to build electronics and do electronics in general. So, with regard to that, earlier this year we got in a donation from Keysight to bring about the recent, I think it was the recent upgrade into the Keysight Smart Bench Essentials cluster. It's a cluster consisting of a waveform generator, power supply, an oscilloscope, and a multimeter. It's essentially these four of these stacked one on one. And with this particular cluster, we should be able to perform any high fidelity development and R&D that we need to within our Radio Shack. Now, apart from that, the next goal, I guess, and this is essentially the next plan of action, is to bring in some more equipment via the Fluke education program. Now, few of these equipments are actually wireless measurement equipment that we plan to bring in, because while wired equipment do work and they absolutely have no issue, the goal is to future proof the club and the shack and our maker space to ensure that we are proof for the next 20 to 25 years of advancements that are to come in the field of electrical engineering. And it's largely in part with that we want to move towards more advanced state of the art equipment. And Fluke has an education program where we can put in proposals. I'm currently working on that proposal, and once that's through, we should be able to bring in all of the equipment that is listed here with a kit, an amp meter, and then a wireless multimeter along with another wired kit for redundancy. So far, do we have any questions? Okay. So apart from the things that we spoke about, I guess the next things in line are to further develop and future proof the club with regards to funding and our financial standpoint. Now, one of the things during COVID was an issue that we had. There was no money to make any upgrades. We had to raise funds by selling off those old vacuum tubes that we had in the shack. But to ensure that we don't come in such a we don't occur such a situation in the future, the goal is to now be financially adept within the club where we have enough funds for the next 5 to 10 years of operation for any emergencies in the shack that can come up. And that's the goal is to accomplish that with getting more research and development funding. This funding is again a part of, it's going to be a part of the Fulton Student Organization's funding that comes in. That's $10,000 every year, as well as bringing in new fundings through the Grand Challenger Scholars Program, as well as other funding sources like ARRL. Now, apart from that, the next thing, I guess I'm putting these fundings into categories here for us to understand better, but R&D funding is to ensure that our projects and the new R&D that we plan to do in the shack doesn't lack funding at a future date. Now, apart from the R&D funding, the next goal is to have shack upgrade funding. And the reason I say shack upgrade funding is because some of you might have seen the news on ASU's website, the recent meeting, but there is a new library that is planned to be constructed at our current shack space. The CSB is going to be demolished and the John McCain library will come in. Now, when the McCain library does come in, it might be about 5 to 10 years later, but we do have an antenna that needs to be relocated, which means we need to bring in city permissions and get other construction and all of those facilities involved to ensure that we can have a smooth transition of the antenna to wherever our new home is from the CSB. So in terms of the shack upgrade process itself and moving out of CSB, Dr. Lindsay and I are working on that currently to try and find us a new place beyond the CSB. Dr. Lindsay is reaching out to a few of his colleagues to see where we could go. And I'm trying to get in touch with the FSO and try to see if there's a space where we can temporarily move majority of the equipment to. Now, this funding is essentially to secure us for the period when we do move. We will need monetary means to be able to pay for a lot of the antenna tower being put in with a new foundation and things like that. So that essentially justifies this particular shack upgrade funding that I put in here. Now, the next thing in line is the antenna upgrade and change. Now, I had mentioned previously here that our 40 meters is in a very bad condition and requires tuning, but the antenna in general is very old and is reaching its end of life soon. So the goal is to have a backup antenna in place so that when this does go out, we don't have to wait for funds and or the antenna, and we have an antenna available spare to replace our current antenna. And we have a multi-band antenna like I spoke about previously here. Let's see. Here, so it has a 10, 15, 20, and 40 meter ability. The goal is to get something similar to that antenna with a higher gain rate than our current antenna. So it's an upgrade instead of just switching what we have for the same thing all over again. Now, apart from this, I mentioned redundancy here, and this is largely in part of talks with George. The goal is to get a wire antenna or omnidirectional antenna that can be used in case our beam does give up. So this acts as an additional redundancy that's built into our antenna systems for the multi-band HF specifically. Now, other than the antenna upgrades that we need to account for, we are currently secured in terms of our radio. We have a flex radio that will now be commissioned as the primary radio. We have 2 spare ICOMs. Apart from the one we purchased, I managed to get another one from ICOM a little later as an additional radio within the shack, as well as another ICOM. So 3 ICOMs in total, actually. One was donated from an individual who passed away as a silent key, and he was Sun Devil and wanted his radio to come over to the to W7ASU, and that's the third radio essentially. But we have that radio still needs to be functionalized and tested to ensure it's working. But we know for a fact that we have 2 spare ICOMs. Both are the same radios that are fully functional. Now, since we are set in the radio spares category, I guess the next category to make ourselves more adept in is the linears. Now, our previous linears fail point was the actual vacuum tube. So the goal now is, apart from bringing in another spare vacuum tube for our new linear amplifier, just to ensure that we have a spare in-house for whenever that tube does go out, and also learning from the previous experience that our Alpha 374 does not have vacuum tubes in production. I guess the best choice is to bring in a vacuum tube right now when it is in production and store it in-house for when the current tube does give out. Apart from that, I guess the miscellaneous items are to bring in spare coax and such things. And the final funding point that the goal is to work on now is to bring in some money to cover licensing exam fees for new members that are willing to be licensed. And in conjugate with trying to cover the licensing fee, we have a functionalized Canvas course that Stito, George, and I, along with the West Campus Suaro Nights Radio Club president Marco, all 4 of us, along with help from a lot of other people, built. And this Canvas course is now functionalized and published. And whoever wants to get involved can send me their ASU email, and we should be able to add them to the course. The course essentially consists of ARRL presentations along with quizzes that have been curated after those presentations. George is overseeing most of the content there. George is a licensed ARRL instructor, certified ARRL instructor. And whenever someone does have questions, they can reach out to George, Dr. Lindsay, myself, Dr. Aberley, or Marco, and we would be more than happy to answer any of those questions that you guys might have. So with that, I guess we'll stop for a few questions if you guys have any, and for me to catch my breath because I realized I've been talking very fast for too long. Any questions? George, any other things to add?
Go back to the slide 9. So what you may not realize is that the egg beater antennas were primarily designed for satellite and for shuttle. So we have the capability of getting ISS and also Oscars. So we have the 2 meter and the 0.7 meter capability there. And then the beam, assuming at some point we get a directional pointer, you can also use that for ISS and Oscar. Of course, they've been talking about deorbiting the space station now for a while, so it's just a matter of time. But right now, I think the schedule is 2035, so we've got at least 10 years to go before that happens. And what I've talked to Nabhan about, which I don't think we formalized yet, but we have, as he said, we have several ICOM 7300s. So one of the things that I discussed with Nabhan was taking a 7300, and we have a dummy load. We have a 1,000-watt antenna dummy load, and making a station just for people to practice on. So they can learn how to use ham radio, and in the course of getting their license, they'll be able to learn how to talk on it and everything else. The antenna, since it's a dummy load, does not transmit, so we don't have to worry about anybody transmitting. So that can be a workstation for hams in learning. I've also just acquired 2 Collins 30L-1 linears. So I'm going to be donating one to the club. Uses much cheaper tubes. It's not as powerful as the current linears, but it'll be as good as a backup. So it'll put out, you can probably get up to about 800 watts maximum. It's going to be about 400 to 600 watts average. But the nice thing is it uses 4 811A tubes, and the total cost for those brand new are about $200 to $250. So much less expensive to maintain than the Alpha was. I think that was probably about it for now, but I don't know what else you got in your presentation there.
Roger. So continuing on, essentially from there, I guess now with all of these equipments that came in now, there's one thing that George had mentioned to me, which is don't try to solve more than one equation at once. The rule of engineering is to not bring in too many variables and try to solve for all of them at the same time. At least that's what aerospace engineering taught me before I moved to molecular biology. With all of this equipment, we have plenty of work cut out for us. And I think the goal now is starting December, once the semester is over, obviously, to functionalize all of this equipment, start commissioning it one after the other, but also in the process, rebuild the shack, ensuring that we have accounted for every possible scenario so that we don't have to, let's say, bring the antenna down 15 days after it was put up because there's a loose connection. So it's essentially to do everything right so that we are future proof for the next 20 years at least with minimal maintenance that needs to be performed. Now, to give a preface, the previous antenna and the coax cable lasted about 30 years before it had to be switched out in during COVID. And we know for a fact if we do this maintenance and upgrade in a streamlined fashion, ensuring that we take detailed records of everything that's done and create a maintenance log for all of this equipment should serve us for a long, long time. Now that we've gone through essentially all of these new equipments that are coming in, those that have already been delivered, I think there's a vision that we need to define. Now, throughout writing all of these funding proposals for the club and in general throughout the last 2 years, uh, actually 3 years now with the club, there's one common vision that the long members of this club, as well as our faculty advisor Dr. Lindsay, and in general any ham has, right? And it's to have that dream Radio Shack. Now, being close to that, I guess it's more important to define that vision and to quantify it, because qualitatively, Dream Shack can be anything as simple as an ICOM without a linear just connected to a beam, right? Now, to quantify it, I guess the goal of this Dream Shack, now I'm not quantifying it here in terms of the equipment because all of that is already being detailed. And if we get new equipment in, it becomes redundant. Or if it's a better upgrade, then that becomes the primary and what we have becomes redundant. And as a college club, I think having that agility and having that having that flexibility in bringing equipment in and out to be able to accommodate and to keep up to date with technological development is critical. But at the same time, the goal is to have a cohesive flow from contact to QSL logging, which is from when a person sits on that chair, picks up the mic, all the way to logging that particular contact, producing the QSL, and that QSL either being digitized. Actually, I'll change that to QRZ. I mean, I'll keep it QSL for now until I confirm. But Judge, QRZ was the more adept definition for a contact, correct?
QRZ is the most widely used website to go to, but there's if you're an ARL member, there's Logbook of the World, there's EQSL, there's QTH, there's all sorts of different websites you can go to do logging and verification.
Copy that, Judge. Yes. So essentially, again, like I mentioned previously, the goal is from going to the point of logging the contact from when it's made, and that flow being cohesive. And a part of that is having a functional computer with a functional logging software that's interfaced with the printer to produce QSL cards in high throughput. So if we have, let's say, a school club roundup, then we should have the ability in-house to be able to put out QSL cards as and when the contacts happen, which allows us to have more number of people, which allows us to send out these QSL cards to more number of people, thereby signifying that contact and having a historical proof with whoever it was, which and they can probably one day look back at it when W7ASU is among the top contenders in the nation in terms of a ham radio club with various abilities that are within. So that's what I mean when I say a cohesive flow from contact to QSL card. Now, the next is the user experience. Now, the current experience we have is borderline traumatic. Now, I say that because you go in and you turn on the ICOM and you have no clue for the first 15 minutes because everything in the ICOM is out of whack and you have to reset the ICOM, and because of the high SWR in the line, we aren't able to use it. You then need to put antenna tuner in line with the beam and the transmitter, but that antenna tuner itself, we don't know if that works. And after trying to juggle everything and bring it up to a working functionality, you'll finally be able to make a few contacts, but that's about 45 minutes in. It should not be that difficult. Matter of fact, with the current equipment that we have, we should be nowhere close to such a situation. So the goal is to have a clean loaded shack, which is loaded with up-to-date equipment that's calibrated, functionalized, tested to ensure that we have on-demand contact ability and we don't have to perform calibrations. Yes, fine-tuning would be required and that's okay. But essentially, we shouldn't sit there doing repairs when we need to be making contacts. And that was the situation during this school club roundup was Marco and I were doing repairs instead of doing contacts, which we should have been doing. So that's what I mean with an experience. Now, visual abilities here refers to having display units with large waterfall charts to ensure we are able to visualize these bands clearly and to see where we have activity going on within those frequency sets so that it's easier to tune in there and get contact in. Now, the multiband and mode abilities again just lies to the fact of commissioning in these antennas and expanding our abilities from what we have, which is the 40 meters and going 40 meters to 10 meters, and then entering the 6 meter, 2 meters, and the 70 centimeters categories. Now, remote operation, this is again put here in line with the new flex radio that we have, but remote operation, the reason I say evolution is critical is in history with everything, when it doesn't evolve, nature phases it out, right? There's in biology, in molecular biology, there's a very crucial theory that we go by, which is called the Charles Darwin's theory, right? And Darwin's theory of selection,
Ready? Nope.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to unmute.
Oh, okay. No problem. So there's something known as the theory of selectivity, which is nature selects something that's strong and something that can survive, right? So if we are not able to evolve and survive, we will become what Nokia and what Kodak became. Nokia did not evolve, or Blueberry. What was the phone brand, Stitha? Do you remember?
BlackBerry.
Right, BlackBerry didn't evolve and they said their quad keypad phones were really nice, and long story short, they went out. Nokia had a similar fate. Kodak said their film is more important than digitizing their cameras, and hence they went out of business and companies like Canon and Nikon took over. Evolution is critical to sustaining any long-term activity, and as a result, for us to evolve with the latest trend is critical to ensure ham radio as a hobby is kept up. Now, one of those goals in that particular realm is remote operation, and that's what we learned from our most recent catastrophe, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. And flex radio is one step in that direction, and the computer, getting in the new computer, but there is a lot more to making this happening. Now, while a lot of this part is with regard to the shack itself, for the makerspace that you see here, which used to look barren, but now is fairly loaded with the new equipment that we got in. The goal with this makerspace is to have a fully stacked abled makerspace, which allows us the capability of homebrewing and making trans receivers in-house. I know Stito was interested in building a trans receiver, but with this new equipment, we'll have the ability to design, build, test, configure, and calibrate trans receivers in-house, build and test antennas, repair our currently existing equipment, as well as produce make a space for anyone who wants to practice electronics and telecommunications, and allow them a free to use makerspace where they have the state of the art equipment that they can work with and build stuff. Now, one of the other things that I'm currently working on is to work with Ultimaker to get us a new 3D printer. That is a little in the works and will still take some time because they are coming out with a new release later this year, and then once that release comes out, the goal is hopefully after they've shipped out the initial back orders, we'll get a unit that's sponsored by them, donated to us. So we'll have a new Ultimaker 3D printer with roughly a 400 into 400 bed size, which is as big as bed size would be for FDM printer. Sounds good, Zach. Thank you so much for coming in, and keep in touch on Discord. In the next few weeks, look out for messages for shack visits to try and get a lot of this equipment installed. And if you are interested in IT and other group projects, I know one new thing with regard to software engineering and in general IT interface is to build a new interface software for the Flex Radio in collaboration with Flex Radio. It's an open source software that we need to work on building for them and the rest of the ham radio community, but I will keep you guys copied on that.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, thanks for coordinating the meeting, and I'll be looking out for shack visits and see you back on to the next one.
Well, thank you so much for attending, Zach. It's all George.
Yep, take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye. So moving on. So essentially having the ability for anybody to come in, and if you have an idea, you should be able to translate it into reality in the shack. And we'll accomplish that with the new 3D printer that will be added. It will be an FDM 3D printer along with a second SLA 3D printer. And the SLA 3D printer, the second resin printer, which uses a resin to build stuff, essentially will allow the maker an ability to engineer and print more fine, intricate details. And with these two printers added to the shack, we should have all the required ability to be as future-proof as possible for a maker space. And like I mentioned, for in-house repairs and to upkeep our equipment and to run experimentation in this maker space and to go crazy with it. Now, when I say there shall be no limit, I mean it when I say there shall be no limit, which is the goal is to bring in as much of it is needed to perform any electrical engineering, telecommunication, ham radio, specific related interdisciplinary research, even if it is ham radio interfaced with something else like radio, astronomy. To perform these intersected interdisciplinary research as well, we should have that ability within our shack. And that's the goal when I say there shall be no limit. And this slide is largely in part with, I actually put this slide in 20 minutes before the presentation, and it was because today evening when I was working on this presentation, there's a gentleman who came over and he said, I was a ham and I left ham radio. And I asked him, why? What fueled you to leave ham radio as a service? I was going to say ham radio as a hobby, but I will actually correct myself there and put in service. So he said ham radio is a dying hobby / service, which is the more adept term. And I was, fair enough. Ham radio's definitely had its share of its peak time, like a lot of the newer hobbies have today. But it's definitely not a dying service. Matter of fact, ham radio will never have an end. And at least at ASU, ham radio will never have an end. And that's the goal that we need to make sure as the current members and the current admins of this particular club, which is we future-proof it enough so that the next set of at least the next 20 years, the club should have absolutely no problems staying functional, keeping up to pace with the latest trends in technology and developments in telecommunications and electronics, and applying those developments within the field of amateur radio to allow the engineers at ASU and everybody other than the engineers as well, because matter of fact, a lot of the hams today are not engineers. They're everybody from every other field other than engineering, and it's to an extent it is sad because with the abilities that engineering teaches you, you can do a lot more. So the goal is to create such an environment for engineers to come in where it will benefit not only their career perspectives, but will allow them to develop their skill set. And with all of these new instruments and these new equipment that we bring into the shack, they will be able to use that to perform research and development. And this picture is essentially the shack of Papa Bravo 5 X-ray. And when I meant the dream shack, I was sort of thinking of something like this at the time, essentially having a monitor for all of our required visuals. And I think I had mentioned it in one of these. Yeah, so it's based on user need, right? So we will iterate the shack and update it as we users of the shack feel we need to change something about it, and that will make it really personalized to us as the club members. and also personalized to the club in terms of this moment in time, so that it continues to evolve without having to seize the evolution part of the club. And that is it from my side, gentlemen. Any questions, comments? George, anything else to add?
Did you put a budget in for my pizzas?
Yeah, I am working on the pizzas, George.
Uh-huh.
That's definitely in the
Okay.
works.
No, I think I think I think it's a good idea that you have redundancy, because having one operator at a station handling a contest and having one person next to you recording things is just not a way to handle contests. So you want multiple radios, you want to be able to acquire multiple bands and transmit on multiple antennas. So that's something I think you need. That's a good goal to have. Get away from just having one antenna and one radio operating. But other than that, no, I think we've done a lot. I think Nabhan has done a lot, along with the other, excuse me, I guess I'm indigestion. Along with the other managers that we have, but there's more we've got to do. We've got to get people involved. We got to get people to work on hardware. We've got stuff to take down. We got to take the antenna down off the tower, get the coax changed. We need to get the radio set up and so forth. So I'm in Kansas. It's a little hard for me to get there. I'm going to try to get there, hopefully at Christmas. If not, I'm definitely going to get there sometime next summer. But try to get in there and do some work on the shack. But let's try to take advantage of whatever we've got currently as far as equipment, and make a note of what we need and what we need to replace, and get the stuff upgraded. So I'm really excited that we've got money coming in. We've got capital to work with, and we've got new parts and equipment, to use. Does anybody else have anything? You can unmute if you want to talk. I can't.
I'm just willing to help in any way that I can. This is Landon here.
Okay, great, Landon. Yeah, we appreciate that. So, something I talked to Nabhan is, I mean, I realize that it's hard to get, people like Nabhan was explaining. We have 110 people on a roster. We've only got like maybe 10 or 20 active people. So we need to try to get some groups together and formalized work plans and work parties and get some of this stuff done, because Nabhan doing this all by himself is not a good thing for the club. So we have club members. Let's try to get them engaged and try to get them active. And I mean, if nothing else, you don't need to know necessarily technical things, but we just need a lot of hands at this point. Try to get stuff moved and stuff set up and stuff repaired. So there's a few people that can do the guidance, and the rest can be hammy get me people. So that's what we need at this point.
Landon, thank you for reaching out. I know Landon had reached out earlier, Chad. So I think Landon, you joined the club about 2 weeks ago. I remember going on a phone call with you to discuss your interests.
Yeah, something like that. It was not that long ago.
So I mean, look out for messages on Discord, Landon, and the goal is sometime once the finals are over to get to the shack and try to get things functionalized. And like George said, we have money coming in, and it's definitely not the peak, I can rest attest to you that this is the beginning. There's a lot more that is yet to come in. I'm working on writing as more funding requests so that we have more capital to work with. We have less restrictive environment in terms of our capital and the financial needs that projects need, the club, the shack, and any of it. Dr. Lindsay is continuously working on ensuring that we have that capital as well as we have the space that we have to operate in, because with ASU being such a cutting edge university that has so much happening, a new medical school coming up, a new library coming up, and who knows what coming up, and with Michael Crow, Dr. Crow being such an active president, there is a lot happening at ASU, and land is a scarce resource, and to be able to have the kind of shack that we have is truly an honor for us, and is in itself a big inspiration to get things going, because land, and by land I essentially mean space, right? Shack space or room space is very scarce at ASU. Since we have it, we need to make use of it to make sure that it adds more value, not just to the university, but to this initial message that Ray had sent with regard to the purpose of ham radio. Under the section B, it details continuation and extension of amateurs' proven ability to contribute to the advancement of the radio art. I think as hams, it's our sworn responsibility, if for lack of better terms, to make sure that we stay up to the point and we get things going, especially with the kind of resources we have. And I guess in general, towards the end of the day, the largest goal is to be better than the Wildcats, to be better than UFA. I think that's the biggest aim here. Yeah. So other than that, I think that should be all that I had. If there's anything else to add, please let me know. Bill, I saw your message. The Scottsdale Club's in-person technician's license. Do you want to send a message, Bill, and I can put this on our Discord to see if someone's interested. And if it's in January, okay, let's see.
We're not exactly sure which date. It's maybe January or February.
Okay.
We're putting it together now and getting all of our instructors together. And Al Jensen, he's on. I think you remember Al. He was
Yep, I
there
do.
when I came out. Yep, Al's on the call with us. And he is also he's I mean this whole class revolves around Al. He's very instrumental in putting together the curriculum and the basically the whole program. So we just have to come up with a date that all the instructors are available. I've already got the room. It's one of my customers has a conference room, a very large conference room, and we have a lot of people already that are super interested in this. So this is going to go really, really well when we have the
Sounds
class.
good.
We've done this several times before in the
Mhm.
past, and very successful.
I mean, I know we were actually supposed to have one with you guys, Bill, but we had a very low turnout rate. This was again during COVID, right out of COVID, but
Right.
nonetheless, Bill, if you can send me an announcement or like a poster once your dates are finalized, I can send it over in our Discord server. I might actually also just come in to give the technicians general and hopefully, if all goes well, the extra class license to get a US license. I have an Indian license that is US extra class equivalent, but the goal is to also get a US license because why not?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think and I'm not sure how it works with reciprocal, but I don't know if you have to start from the bottom and work your way up, or I'm not positive how that works.
I need to check as well, Bill. Haven't put much work into that, but I do know that I can use the W7 prefix to my call sign, and that's essentially the equivocal call sign here in the US as my call sign is in India, and
I
it's an
gotcha.
Indian
Okay.
general class license, so it's a US extra class equivalent because we also need Morse code for the general class in India,
Okay. All right.
which
Well,
I
I
am
mean,
actually really proud of.
you're welcome to join our class as well. You have to start at the bottom though, the
Yep.
technician, because we're not offering the extra or the general yet, but it's coming.
I mean, is the exam there, Bill? At least like the exam itself, because the class the class itself, I might have my notes as a refresher. The only thing that might be different here in the US slightly would be I'm gonna say electrical stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can help you out. We can help you out with the testing as well. That's not a problem. We have a couple groups that we work with for testing. So, and just let me know. I have an older couple books I can loan you if you want to come through them. I'm sure the stuff is not, it hasn't changed much. They just added additional questions to the pool and removed a few questions.
That would really help, Bill. Thank you so much. Yes, as the date nears, I will actually come and pick up those books from you to go over. I know we also have some manuals in the shack that I can go over. I know Stito also wants to get licensed. We also have two others in the club who are willing to get licensed. So probably 5-6 of us at minimum.
Oh, that's great. I mean, we have about 10 or 15 already of people that want to get licensed. So add you guys to that, and we have a very large conference room, so it'll be good. It'll be a really nice class. So
Sounds good, Bill. I mean, with the new Canvas course that we have, I think there'll be a lot of people who'll get like a head start even before the class. That way, when the class actually happens, it's more like a refresher. And with that and Al's combined class, they should be able to do very well on the test, hopefully.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll put something as soon as we have a firm date. Then I will go ahead and put that down for put that down on paper and get it to you. Okay.
Roger that, Bill. That would really help. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah, no worries. Okay.
Anything else, Jim?
I have a question for Bill. I bought the Gordon West's technician license book, but it was from like 2018 to 2022. So I bought it like 1.5 years ago. So it ended in 2022. So do I need to get a new book, or what extra should I cover so that I can give the exams without kind of missing any course content?
Yeah, I'm going to defer this question to Al Jensen. He's on the call as well. Al?
Alan. Oh.
Yep, I'm here.
There we go.
I just had to see if I could do this thing here. Let's see. There. All right. Well, I'm there. There. How's that? There hasn't been a whole lot that's changed in the last couple of years on the technician. So do you have to buy the new book? Probably not. The key is to go through some of the practice tests and see how you're doing on them. And I don't know if you know how to get to those yet or not. And on the Gordon West book, did you get the yep, I got it. It's the yellow one.
Let me change to.
It didn't focus in right there. We go.
Yeah.
Okay,
This
let me
one.
write that down. There's a pre-study guide that I can get out to you, I think, and I'll just write those yours down. And I'll find the pre-study guide, send it over to you. As you go through the pre-study guide, fill in the blanks. By the time you get done, you'll have learned quite a bit. Go through some of the tests, see where you're at. When we do the class, we go through just about every question to get you radio ready. And then it's up to the club, and hopefully it's an ASU club or the Scottsdale club or whatever local club gets you onto the radio, so that when you start squeezing that mic button, you can talk back and forth, because that's kind of what everybody wants to do is, can you hear me now? And then you start reaching out, and you go, oh, wow, this thing works. I can talk all the way from one parking lot to another parking lot. And that's pretty cool. It's simple, but it's pretty cool. But then there's a repeater that sits downtown Tempe, and you can get to that repeater, and then your range goes farther out. And then you can get to another repeater. Bill and I were talking this afternoon. He was Bill, you were at Surprise or 99th Avenue in getting clear reception on the Scottsdale repeater, which is on South Mountain.
Oh,
So
it
from
was a
downtown
303
to
and
South
what else?
Mountain, from there, you can get to the East Campus, Polytech campus. You can get downtown Phoenix. So now you've got 3 campuses now together on one repeater. You also guys have got campuses. I know there's one in Lake Havasu. That's going to be a little bit hard to reach on 2 meters. That would take an extra license or a general license, most likely. But all of that's part of the growth that happens. Is that?
Yeah,
you know,
thank you very much.
The key is get the paper, get the license, transmit, see how it works. And at 2 meters, there's a lot you can do, an awful lot. Yeah, you've talked about the bigger antennas, but you can use a short little stubby antenna. There are some other electronic gizmos. Let's see, it looks sort of like this, 2 little antennas that hooks in to radio, hooks into the internet. You're worldwide at that point. My son talks routinely to Australia and New Zealand on 2 meters with something like this. It uses a combination of technologies, and that's a technician license right there. And you are all over. I used to talk to Kazakhstan with one of these.
Well, as very minimum, you can also use Echolink. So if the repeater is tied in,
Echolink. Yes.
Yeah, you got Echolink, you got WiresX, you got
you guys started talking a lot of technology, and you can get into the technology with the Raspberry Pi. I only got 4 of them here. But yeah, that's the technology. You want to be on cutting edge. This is it right now. And there you then it goes from there. It's pretty incredible, and it's just a lot of fun. By the way, my background is not electronics. My background is chemistry and biology.
Oh, that's mine too.
Okay. And I didn't go into chemistry and biology like I thought I was going to when I graduated college. I ended up working for the city of Tempe. So somebody had a question about, can you use the radio does anybody use a radio for emergencies in Tempe? Not as much as we used to. The fire department has got pretty good radio coverage right now. However, when I was there, and that was about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had some pretty big windstorms and trees were blowing down, roads were blocked. We used the ham radio to tell others what was flooding, what roads were passing. And then I could get people out to, because that was part of my job, I could get them out to get the roads opened up. And that, so it's eyes on the ground. You are a one point to many point with communication. One person, such as yourself, can end up talking and getting 15, 20 people informed quickly. And that,
right.
But there are rescues that are done out in the desert where somebody has a 4-wheel drive that breaks down. Summertime, they need to get a tow truck out to them. And radio works out pretty well for that. And so I hope that kind of gives you some ideas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll look into that. And this book, the one I have.
Yeah,
and
I'll get that. I'll get the pre-study guide somewhere. Somehow I'll get that to you. I got some email addresses.
I appreciate it.
Okay. And then I'm going to back off. See ya.
Yeah, gentlemen, it's been 2 hours, so it's 10:30 here. I'm the host, so I think I'm going to go to bed.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming through. It was nice having you all, George. Thank you so much for making it happen. Bringing Jim along. Please convey even more gratitude and thanks from all of us in the clubs and to Jim for coming on and talking to the club despite all of that pain and the time zone difference.
I told him you were going to send him a pizza.
Yeah, about the pizza, George. We're phasing it out to Subway now. It's no more pizza.
Upgrading to Subway.
Okay, well,
Spinanos makes a pretty good pizza.
Yeah, no.
Just thought I'd help.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'm coming to Phoenix so that Nabhan has to take me to Oregon Stop Pizza.
That can definitely happen, George. We can definitely make that happen. When you come in, To Arizona, the pizza is on W7ASU.
Okay. All right. Anyways, thank you, gentlemen, for showing up. I would have liked to have had a few more, but we get what we get. So hopefully everyone has good finals week. Well, next week is Thanksgiving, so I don't know what you guys have planned for Thanksgiving, but whatever it is, whether it's pizza or Subway or going to get a turkey dinner somewhere, have a good holiday.
Likewise,
Thank
George. Everybody
you
have
very
a great
much.
holiday and have a good rest of your evening.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
7-3,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.